Hi, thank you so much for coming to this film. This film is so incredible to me. Toni Morrison means so much to me. I would like to just quickly introduce an incredible woman and professor and educator, Monica L. Miller, who will be moderating our panel. I was lucky enough to take a class with her in my junior year at Barnard that was in partnership with the National Black Theater, and it was one of the most incredible Barnard experiences I had. And so I am very excited to have her here today and to introduce our incredible panel. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Corey. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being with us for that incredible film. It's really hard to think about this after that, but we're going to do our best. We have about a half hour, so I think what I'm going to do is ask each of our. I had a little introduction that I'm going to, I think, skip, and ask each of our panelists to say a little bit about the title. The title of this panel is supposed to be Art and Activism, and we really wanted to focus on that moment in the film where Miss Morrison says, what's most important is, in some ways, doing what can I do where I am. So I wanted each of these amazing panelists to introduce themselves and to say a little bit about what they're doing where they are. And then I'll maybe ask one follow-up question, and then we can just have a conversation here in the audience. So our first person will be Professor Yvette Christensen, my beloved colleague.
That's what you get for sitting next to Monica, who is a beloved colleague and collaborator in doing something that is so important, because the real poverty is to not have an education, whether it's formal or informal, or what Toni Morrison used to call discredited knowledge. There's a moment in this documentary where she's talking about the Bible, where she refers to the Bible. You know, this is a country that really was mapped by the Bible. I come from a country that had a narrative about a Bible. You know, Christopher Columbus called himself Christ bearer. He was either barking mad or he understood Isabel and Ferdinand's delirium. He said he was the one that the writer of Isaiah and Jeremiah had anticipated, and that he was the one, Chris Ferens, the bearer of Christ, who would map the way to the New Jerusalem, the New Jerusalem that would be in this world. And of course, we're sitting in a country that inherited that madness. In South Africa, where I was born, and where I learned to question this very thing that was waiting for me and for all of us when we were born, language, which gripped us by the roots of our hair and dragged us into our names and our designations. There was the descendants of the Dutch settlers who took the country swore that they had claimed that they had sworn a covenant with God to slay and defeat the isiZulu people. So that, if you were to ask me to say something about myself, it's the first thing I can say to you, is that I grew up reading, listening for the sooty footsteps of whatever was shadowing any word, any phrase that came to me. I'm of that generation in South Africa that was called coloured. When I learnt nouns and verbs and adjectives, I would be asked what I was, and I would say I was colouring. And I was immediately called, in fact, I was called retarded. That was the word that was used at the time, which made you always seem very smart, because you would be put in the room with supposedly other retarded people, and you all actually just could think much more freely. You learn to turn the prison cell of that into a tight space for thought. So what I wanted to say, activism, just very, very quickly to say what teaching for me is activism. And the key thing for me is to teach students to listen, to teach students to listen to what we have fought so hard to coin, Toni Morrison refers to sovereignty. A sovereign is also a coin, this coinage. And we come up with phrases about the white gaze, about agency. These are the words that the phrases that we have worked very hard to understand, and we give them to our students, and they trust us. And we don't make a space for them to think and to ask what it is, how they would coin whatever it is that they mean. And so this language becomes a slogan. There's a real critical issue right now, as someone who's a writer who turns to fiction not for redemption, or not for a space of salvation, but who turns to fiction in order to think in the pace and the cadence that a sentence gives you. It is the syntax, the grammar, the comma, the full step, the full stop. That is the step to the next sentence that helps you through the deliriums of bigotry. And it is the necessity for me as a writer to ask my students to think about the language they would find. One reason for this is that we live in this moment of alternative facts. And we live in this moment where upside is down. We live in the moment where Sulla and the community of the bottom knew that someone could say that the top of a hill with the poorest soil is the bottom of heaven. You could be living and assigned to be the dregs of the world, and you could be told that somehow when you smile, as you iron the clothing, as you wash the slop from someone's bad behavior, that you are this wonderful servant who keeps everything good and proper. So you ask me what I would like to say as how all the pieces that I am is what my students say to me in a day, what I've inherited. In fiction, I think of the past as a neighborhood. It is over there. And maybe I can meet it, and maybe I don't ever go there. But I know it's there. And it's part of the everydayness of the world. There are things circulating all the time. And it is in fiction that I ask myself and I ask my students when they're reading to pay attention to the ink on paper, because it's in fiction where I come face to face with another whose radical alterity I have to accept, and who I cannot fold into my joyous possession of the world to make the same as me.
Wow, that was beautiful. Hi, I'm Sade Lithcott. I'm the CEO of the National Black Theater. And the National Black Theater was founded in 1968 by my mother, Dr. Barbara Ann Tier, is the oldest and longest running, continually run black theater in New York, and one of the oldest theaters in the country consistently run by a woman of color. And it's a lot to take in. A part of me was like, I want to jump into the meatiness of the question, Monica. And the other part of me, which is an extension of my work, is where is the breath for digestion? So I want to give everyone permission to take a deep breath. And just kind of settle into where you are and feel the things that you're feeling and emote. And because I think that one of our superpowers in this, frontline work that all of us do, which is the resilience of surviving, is to take stock in our feelings and how we feel. And Dr. Morrison often says that the work is to feel your feelings. I say that that's one of my superpowers, which also makes me appear crazy often in public spaces, how deeply I feel what's going on. But a part of that is the activism, right? Is the relentless injection of our humanity into every breath, moment, and experience. So I would say that the work that I do, I tripped into theater because my mother had this thing that she said my whole life as she was raising my brother and I. And for the benefit of the room, I'll take some of the curse words out. But she said, I don't know why I'm working so effing hard all the time. It's not like y'all are gonna do anything with this. And it was true, right? The audacity to self-define what my own path would be really navigated me as far away from my mother. I'm sure many of us can appreciate that. Only to get smacked in the face with this idea of legacy when she passed away, which was a gift because it gave me the rest of my life, right? And so I would say that this activism in art is something that Toni Morrison said for me at the top of the film, which is that my sovereignty is eliminating the white gaze. And what I truly believe about the work that we do, that any of us do in terms of what we can do in our space with this space that we take up, is to model what is possible. And that is a deep responsibility, and it is a huge burden, because what it means is that with every breath, we are modeling what is possible, right? And so if that act of breath is used to tell a narrative that allows us to stay small, limited, then that is what we're modeling for other people, for our children, our colleagues. And then I think about my ancestors, which, by the way, are like my best friends. I'm never alone because I am acutely aware of just the pantheon of possibilities that came before me in order for me to sit in the seat. So I walk with these ancestors, right? And when you think about it, women, people of color, the audacity to survive these elements that, were talked about in the movie, that were talked about in our families, because of the possibility that we might be free. You may not see it in your lifetime, but I am going to step every step and model that possibility in order for us to be here today in the presence, looking back at the neighborhood of our past, so that there could be a future. So I'm saying all that to say this idea of the audacity of survival of our ancestors, that not just surviving but thriving is a possibility, is what I model in my work and what MBT models in their work, and that is where I start. Because you never know, that seed that was planted for me, in which I grew, is also a seed that I'm planting by just being and feeling, and with the awareness that I give possibility by modeling in that. So I say that it's small, it's every small breath, it's every small step, and it's really led in the most courageous way of unapologetically loving who and how we are. Not for ourselves, not singularly for ourselves, but for the people around us.
Thank you for the breath. After watching that documentary, I'm definitely needing that breath. This is the third time I'm watching it, and I keep writing notes about it. My name is Akia Dorsett. I'm a filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, and in that regard, I am trying to really create visuals and create record of myself, my community as a queer woman of color. I came from the Bahamas about 16 years ago, from a country that is black, and then I arrived here and realized that I was black. I didn't really, in the Bahamas I was defining myself as a Bahamian, and that was enough. And then when I got here and people started asking me very strange questions, I realized, there's a lot of stuff to unpack. In the Bahamas, I was just unpacking being queer, and I wanted to go somewhere where I would be free. And I came here and thought that would be the place I would be free. And then I realized that I had a lot of other layers to contend with, especially when I landed in Minnesota. And I realized, wow, there's a lot of white people here. So being in a place where you are the center, and now being in a country where you are pushing, one of the things that I love is this whole idea of the master narrative. And I think that it is about recreating what the master narrative is and pushing us to the center with my work. Two ways that I do that, is by creating original work. So one of the first documentaries I did was about queer women of color on a poetry tour, and someone was like, why are you making that? And it really was because I went to this place, it was about 10 years ago now, in Brooklyn, in a brownstone, parlor level, if anybody knows. And I walked in, and there were just this warmth and this love and this amazingness where all of these queer women of color were represented in all types of different ways, masculine of center, really femme, ultra femme, just being and looking cool and spreading their poems and their work and their songs. And I was just like, wow, this is amazing, and I want to share it with others. And so I decided to document that. And one of the things that in the film they said was this whole idea is that there's a world that exists, like we are living our lives outside of, being black in America, right? And what does that look like? And so I wanted to really document that. So that was in my first film. And the second, I was commissioned to make a Stonewall documentary, a 4-part for NBC. And I thought, one, I had not ever felt that Stonewall truly reflected people of color. Only in these last, I would say 10 years are people really like putting us back in there. And I wanted to start doing that. And so I took on that role and took on that task and, unpacked people that from 1940s were working. I really encourage you to look up Ernestine Eckstein, marching, the only woman of color in Philadelphia, fighting for LGBTQ rights at a time when that was not even a thing. The acronym was not even created. It was just the homophile movement. So, I'm always trying to figure out, in a visual sense, how to write us back in there and how to keep a record. Because I know when I was doing my research coming up, I could not find myself. And so for the next generation, I really want to make sure that when you search what we're doing now, that it comes up, and that we are telling our own stories, and that people can't write us out of history. And so that's where I am with my work.
Thank you all so much for all of that. In the spirit of breath, I think maybe we will engage the audience now and then get questions and comments. They can be about the work that that any of these wonderful people are doing, or about your impressions about the movie and things if we want to bring together what panelists have said and what we've experienced through Ms. Morrison's words. That would be wonderful. Audience, is there a mic going around? I can send my mic.
Hi, my name is Lydia, and I read The Blue Aside for the first time in college, and I felt like finally somebody understood who I was as a person, because that was me, and not really knowing who I was, but being able to have justification for just being me. And I read all her books. I've struggled with Beloved a lot. I still haven't finished it. But she just made me feel justified for being exactly who I am, and I'm still trying to figure that out. But the one thing I have to say, my mother never censored anything. She just let me get a library card, and I just would go to the library and just read books, but never had anything like Toni Morrison in the library. I used to read True Confession magazines under her bed. as if she didn't know I was there. But Toni Morrison made everything come together, and I could see myself in her stories, and it just made me feel good to see this documentary and have her talk to me, because she was talking to me. I don't know about y'all, but she was talking to me, and it really made me feel very good, and I'm hoping that I can share this with my Girl Scout troop at some point.
Could I say something? This is why I love documentaries. I think a documentary is an extraordinary, educating encounter visual. The Toni Morrison, you know, we each, I think, have said something about not seeing ourselves. And I only realized that when I saw myself. I mean, you know, I grew up in South Africa, and then my family went into exile to Swaziland. And there it was the last country in Africa to receive independence. And we were reading what was Macaulay's late long colonial curriculum, and the Fields of Golden Daffodils, and then suddenly, and my mom, one of the reasons why we had to flee South Africa was my mom was moving banned books. And some of the books were by Black American writers. And, you know, I read them, and they were something was happening. And then one night I had a dream. I'd already started writing. I was 13, and I'd written my first novel. And my mom would read it, and my mom would be very nice and and then she'd say, you know, you have to grow into this. And then one of the characters in my novel came up in front of me, and I realized that she had my face, but she was white. And she spoke to me in the manner of a 19th century novel. She said, "Why, la-dee-da," she said. And I went, "Oh my," and I made her sound southern, I'm sorry. But she said, "Oh la," like somebody out of a Jane Austen novel. And I woke up and I was weeping. And I ran into my mom's bedroom. That poor woman was always being woken at 3, 4 in the morning when I had an idea. And I said, Mum, I just saw I'm so ashamed. And she asked me to explain, and I felt like I'd been passing in the writing, but I didn't know that I wasn't there until I saw that I wasn't there. Now, the question is, if my students don't see themselves in a novel, should they look away from it? That's the question, the biggest question now. Is if you don't see yourself, how do you do it? And what I ask them to do is read with a squint, because they are there. That's what Morrison also taught us. In her book, Black Matters, read that. Read that, because she'll show how you're there.
Sorry. Anyone else? Comment or question?
While we're waiting for the next comment or question, what I'll also say is that the magic of seeing yourself for the first time, right? Even thinking about it, like I have the privilege of developing and supporting playwrights who write themselves into existence. And so that's the other thing to do, right? We're blessed when we can find someone who recognizes us. But we also have this divine power to write ourselves into existence as a form of activism. And I guess the thing is, with Morrison in particular, is it's not that we don't exist, right? It's not that we don't exist, but too often, this kind of idea of like the status quo, the gaze, the Western gaze, is not nearly, in all of its details, complex enough or intersectional enough for our stories, our particular stories, our recipes of of our like personal gumbo to come forward. And that writing our stories into existence is the revolution. And so what I would also like lean into what you beautifully said around how you guide your students with this squint is that perhaps our activism, each and every one of us, is the audacity to write ourselves into existence, into the spaces that we most feel erased from. And that could be writing, it could be cooking, it could be dancing, it could be storytelling, it could be anything. But that is always ours. And that is always going to be the key to liberation, is the recognition that we exist and matter. And if you can do that for yourself, I promise you, you're doing it for somebody else. And I know I've already said that, but really, it's so key.
I always tell my students when I'm teaching Morrison, I know Yvette's teaching Morrison right now too, that, I mean, we cannot forget that her first book was published when she was 39. Like, it is just never too late. And I said, when I'm speaking undergraduates, I was like, you've got 20 years left. I mean, it's plenty of time. There's a hand over here.
Hi, I'm Terry Newman. I graduated Barnard 1979, and Toni Morrison was the speaker at my graduation. And I remember I had never heard of her, never read one of her books, and she told the story. She used the story of Cinderella and the wicked stepsisters to talk about how we were the first generation of women that were really going to be in powerful positions, and how important it was. There was a history of men abusing men, of men abusing women, and how important it was as we stepped into our power not to be the mean stepsisters, but to empower other women. And it was so powerful, and really has stayed with me with such clarity and force. And then I discovered her as a writer, but she really was such a powerful speaker about the importance of women lifting up other women.
I mean, I think right now, one of the things that I'm trying to move away from is dwelling in the pain so much, because we have such a long record of pain, and try to see how we can push ourselves toward those moments of joy, and how joy can be an act of activism, and how capturing the simplicity sometimes of life can be an act of activism. I feel like sometimes you go, this is like back to the Academy Awards, what type of films do they think are worthy of telling? And can Black stories in all their simplicity be meaningful? And can Black stories of joy be as meaningful as Black stories of struggle? And I think that's a bigger discussion, but one that I'm continuing to interrogate. I think I love that the Black Joy Project. I love seeing these kind of vibrant, queenly images. I loved Black Panther. I loved that moment where you kind of got a chance to escape. And sometimes I don't want to escape into pain, and what that means in the grander scheme.
I think the challenge with the historical kind of destination of struggle and pain is that, in fact, the destination part is the challenge, right? Because the thing is, it's universal. We all experience struggle, we all experience pain, but no other race is defined by it the way that Black folks are. So the challenge with the retelling of our struggle and pain is if it is the A to the Z and it's the end all be all. I think our pain and struggle is one of the most beautiful, articulated, jet fuel to get to a love that's so deep. And MBT had this season that was called In the Pursuit, what was it called? Black well, what was it called? I can't, every season something. In Pursuit of Black Joy. And we did that season in the middle of what was being called the killing season. It was those years of the birth of Black Lives Matter, and every week, it seemed like every month, there was another killing on repeat on the television, and to the point where people really perceived that as the breadth of our story. And we decided that that season of our production should be as a form of activism dedicated to the pursuit of Black joy, because that is what would that was a healing modality through all of this. And so I think that the thing is with all of it is what, like, to relook at spaces that are punctuations for us. My favorite punctuation is a freaking comma, right? Or a dot, dot, dot. In that our pain and our struggle is real. We don't want to cover it up, but we just don't want it to define us singularly. And so I say we have to set a table for ourselves, a brilliant, pristine table where both our light and dark can show up. And when we do that, when we set a table for the pain, we equally create an altar for our joy. It is both that really allows us to navigate a world in which our healing and our liberation is possible.
Thank you. Can I just say something? Ellipses, my favorite thing. Ellipses, I tell students, it's where you see language waiting to find itself. It's where you see the thinking happening on the page. It's just the most exquisite thing, and all hail the comma. Because it gives bracket and sense, it's sense-bearing. If I could just say something, yes, and one thing about the Toni Morrison writing is if you read ink on paper, you will see the joy. Yeah. You will see the precision, the exquisiteness of a line. You know, the opening moment of Sulla, in that place, where they tore the blackberry patchet, just listen, in that place. I mean, that's the walking, breathing pace. Up the footstep, that place. I mean, it's actually a spondy, right? In that place. And then she moves, you read her. She has that unstressed, stressed syllable, that skipping, da, da, da. That woman is so, I tell my students, Wile E. Coyote, and she's in the river and the joy of the writing, even when she's writing the pain. And she's full of jokes. Yeah. Who's the woman who looked like the south end of a northbound mule? I mean, I just can't. Now, the one challenge for me as a writer, for you, I don't know, but a documentarist, and when you're choosing plays or curating spaces for people to put their plays on, is what Morrison talked about, how she was accused of being provincial. The question was, when you're trying to resist that, and when you're just trying to write up a neighborhood that someone else might never traverse, is how to resist being local color. And the local color, that's the focalization point, and that's what Morrison never explains. She'll talk about a sack and row man in Paradise, and you can spend days on the web trying to find what a sack and row man was. What was he, a traveling salesman for what? And she never explains it. In the same way, when I was being told to read Jane Austen, and I still read Jane Austen, I don't give up Wordsworth. That's part of my canon too. Is I was never asked to understand what a nant was, what a nuncle was, or I was never told. Someone knew, but the way the language falls on the page, and the way the phrase sack and row man falls in the line, it gathers a certain authority, and you know that this was something important. You'll see that man walking, you know you should have paid attention to him, but you'll remember that he was there. Who he was, what he was, it doesn't matter. He was there, because Sack and Row is a neighborhood over there that maybe I can find.
Okay, I think we are out of time, which is sad, but we can have a conversation afterwards. Thank you all for being here.
Can I just
Oh,
leave
yeah.
with a Toni Morrison quote?
Toni Morrison quote.
Yeah, so that
We'll
we can
end on
all
that.
walk out with this.
Okay.
And she said this, okay, it's my favorite quote also. She says, I tell my students when we get these jobs that we have been so brilliantly trained for, just remember that your real job is that you are free. You need to Just remember that your real job is that you are free, and you need to free somebody else. If you have some power, then your job is to empower somebody else.
Thank you, Sade.
Yeah.
Thank you.